Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jennie. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode, despite no declaration of war, this war has started.
First Allied and Axis aircraft shot down in the entire war.
Fatal to any civilized order in the world.
This was going to touch everyone, everywhere.
Welcome to History Date Night, a podcast where I attempt to turn my history obsession into something useful. My name is Justin, and I am a history enthusiast, and a very, emphasis on very, amateur historian.
And I'm Jennie. We're a couple living a regular life, and somehow I got roped into this podcast. I'm here to help translate Justin's history talk into something people can actually understand. Apparently, we are spending our date nights talking World War for the next few years.
The goal of this podcast is to go through World War II in chronological order, following the campaigns, politics, and people from all over the world simultaneously. This is something that I've seen other history podcasts and series struggle with. World War II was the Second World War, and I mean actual world war. People from every continent were involved. The effects did not stay on battlefields, as innocents all over the world paid for the ambitions of a few men.
So, when does World War II actually start? It's not as easy a question as it seems. Some historians would say it started directly after World War I with the signing of the Versailles Treaty, since that laid the groundwork for the unrest that brought the wrong people to power. If you lived in China, you might say the war began in 1937 with the Japanese invasion, or even earlier with Japan seizing Manchuria in 1931. China is listed on the UN Charter as the first victim of Axis aggression.
Others point to Italy's invasion of Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, in 1935, or Germany's remilitarization of the Rhineland, or the Spanish Civil War, or the occupation of Czechoslovakia. There's a lot, but it is generally accepted that the German invasion of Poland marked the moment the war became a truly global world war. That act drew in the European powers and their global empires, states on every inhabited continent, and made it global. So, we'll turn to September 1st, 1939 as the beginning. But even then, that date was only the beginning of the German-Polish War.
And this war did not start the way World War I did. World War I began after over a month of deliberation, mobilizations, and deadlines. This one began with sporadic gunfire in the middle of the night. Before we get into it, we will most definitely be mispronouncing lots of names and places throughout this series, but we're going to try our best. We'll also be doing our best to help you picture where things are happening, because so much of this takes place in parts of the world that we're not really familiar with.
Right. So before we dive in, a quick picture of Poland in 1939. Poland is roughly the size of New Mexico, sitting in the middle of Europe. Germany is directly to its west, and to the east is the Soviet Union. To the north, Poland has a narrow strip of coastline on the Baltic Sea called the Polish Corridor, a thin strip of land giving the country its only ocean access, with the port of the city of Danzig at the top of it. To the east of this corridor lies a German enclave, the German homeland of East Prussia and Königsberg. Germany was founded by the Prussians, who combined a series of small German-speaking nations into Germany. After World War I, in the Treaty of Versailles, the newly independent Poland was granted enough German territory to create this corridor to the sea, and the German enclave of East Prussia. Before World War II, Nazi Germany sought to reclaim the Polish corridor and the free city of Danzig by demanding their return, establishing extraterritorial transport links across the corridor and applying intense diplomatic pressure. These efforts aimed to reconnect East Prussia with Germany, ultimately using Poland's refusal to cede the territory as a pretext for this 1939 invasion.
Back to Polish geography. Warsaw, the capital, sits in the center of the country. The whole nation is essentially a flat plain. The word Poland actually comes from a Slavic word meaning flat land. There are almost no natural barriers. There are no mountains, no wide rivers near the borders. When armies come, there's nowhere to hide. Keep that picture in mind.
The war doesn't begin with the declaration at dawn. On September 1st, 1939, war begins at 1:40 in the morning at a small border post in the northwest corner of Poland, right up against the German frontier. A 38-year-old Polish corporal named Piotr Konechka is killed in a firefight with German saboteurs during a border incursion. He is the first combat casualty of the deadliest war in human history, and nobody even knows it yet.
This is hours before what we'd consider the official start. Over the next 3 hours before dawn, German forces are crossing the border in multiple places at once. It's happening all along that western frontier. At 3:30 a.m., Polish border guards on bicycles are fired on near the southern part of that same border. At 4:30, just an hour later, a Polish corporal, not an officer, just an ordinary soldier, makes a split-second decision to blow up a railway bridge as German troops are literally crossing it.
That bridge matters because it's one of the main rail crossings over the Vistula River. The Vistula is Poland's Mississippi, if you will, the great river that runs through the heart of the country from south to north. Blowing that bridge means Germany can't use the rail line to rush troops and supplies south. That corporal understood the stakes, made the call, and acted. That's what makes this war so human from the very first hour. These aren't grand strategic decisions being made in Berlin or Warsaw. These are low-ranking soldiers making impossible choices in real time, right in the beginning of conflict.
Now, most historians point to 4:44 a.m. as the official start of the war. That's when the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opens fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. Westerplatte is a small peninsula. Picture a narrow spit of land poking out into the harbor of Danzig, Poland's main port on the Baltic coast. The Poles had a small military depot there, a few hundred soldiers holding a position surrounded by water on 3 sides. The German battleship had been sitting in the harbor on a so-called friendly visit, but it did not turn out to be a friendly visit.
And 10 minutes before that, at 4:34, the first aerial action of the war had already begun. German dive bombers attacked Polish engineers at a railway bridge about 30 miles south of Danzig. The engineers were trying to blow it up before the Germans could use it. This is one of the first tactical uses of dive bombers in warfare. The Germans are so desperate to keep this bridge intact that they're throwing their newest technology at it. But did they save it? No. The Poles successfully blew the bridge at 6 in the morning. Despite no declaration of war, this war has started.
Things don't slow down. At 6:30 a.m., there's a dogfight near Krakow, Poland's second largest city in the south of the country, about the way Chicago sits relative to New York, if Warsaw is New York. That dogfight produces the first Allied and Axis aircraft shot down in the entire war. Polish pilot Władysław Genisz shoots down a German bomber, which crashes into a second German bomber, a 2-for-1. But Genisz himself is shot down in that same fight by a German pilot named Frank Neubert. Interestingly, both pilots would survive the war, and 50 years later, in 1989, they meet face to face.
That must have been a strange conversation. Remember that one time we tried to kill each other? But this does show that this isn't a war between enemies so much as a war between governments. Ordinary men on both sides are just doing what they're ordered to do. But the Poles aren't just defending either. Around 7 a.m., 54 Polish fighters intercept a massive German bombing raid headed for Warsaw. We're talking 80 German bombers with 20 fighter escorts heading for the capital, right in the center of the country. And the Poles scatter them. They force them to drop their bombs early and turn them back. Warsaw doesn't get bombed on September 1st because of those pilots.
In the southwest of Poland, right along the German border, in the industrial heartland region called Silesia, there's a battle at a place called Mokra. The German 4th Panzer Division, tanks, attacks the Polish Wojnicka cavalry brigade. By September 3rd, the Germans have lost about 50 tanks and 150 other vehicles trying to break through this one position. And this is a good moment to address the Polish cavalry myth, the famous story about Polish cavalry charging tanks with lances.
It is a myth, and it's kind of insulting to what these men actually accomplished. Polish cavalry were mounted infantry, so they rode horses to get into position quickly, then dismounted and fought with modern weapons. Anti-tank rifles, artillery support, machine guns, they were highly effective, which is why the Germans lost so many vehicles at Mokra. The cavalry charging tank story was actually German propaganda that got repeated so often people started to believe it. The reality is that Polish cavalry on horseback were beating German armored columns, so keep that in mind when you hear the old stories.
While all of this is happening along Poland's borders, What is Hitler doing? Well, at 11 a.m., he appears before the Reichstag, the German parliament, wearing a field gray military uniform from World War I instead of his usual brown party jacket. He says, "From now on, I am just the first soldier of the German Reich. I have once more put on that coat that was the most sacred and dear to me. I will not take it off again until victory is assured, or I will not survive the outcome." It was incredibly theatrical.
It was pure propaganda, but effective. He's positioning himself as a fellow soldier, not just a politician sending other people's sons to die. Meanwhile, Hitler's closest ally is already backing out. Mussolini of Italy sends word asking to be released from any obligation to join the war. Hitler agrees with a cordial telegram at 9:40 a.m. saying he doesn't need Italy's help, quote, "in these circumstances," end quote. So even before Britain and France respond, the Axis is showing cracks that only materialize years down the line.
Britain and France, who are treaty-bound to defend Poland, respond to the invasion by sending strongly worded letters. At 9 p.m., the British ambassador hands Germany an ultimatum to withdraw from Poland. France delivers an identical note an hour later. But these are just warnings. Poland is fighting alone on September 1st. Roosevelt holds a press conference saying that America will make every effort to stay out of the war.
So, at this moment, Poland is completely alone. And two other things happen on September 1st that show exactly what kind of war this is going to be. Up in Danzig, that contested port city on the Baltic coast that we mentioned at the start, the one that Germany claimed it needed back, well, the Polish post office surrenders after 15 hours of fighting. In it were just postal workers and civilians who had barricaded themselves in and held out all day. The director, Jan Machen, walks out carrying a white flag.
And they shoot him. He's killed immediately. Most of the defenders will be executed a month later, even though they surrendered. This is the SS, not the regular German army. These aren't soldiers following the rules of war. And on September 2nd, the Nazis established Stutthof prison camp just outside Danzig, about 20 miles east of the city along the coast. It will be redesignated as a concentration camp in January 1942. The infrastructure for what comes later is being built in the first 48 hours of war.
The infrastructure and the mindset. On September 2nd, Poland upgrades from a state of emergency to a state of war. Battles are breaking out across the country, and here's a detail most people don't know. A lone Polish bomber crosses the border and attacks a German chemical factory in Silesia, just inside Germany, across the border from southern Poland. It's the first air raid on German soil in World War II. Poland is now fighting back and bombing Germany.
I always picture Poland as purely defensive in this campaign, and on September 2nd, Italy proposes a peace conference to address what they call the Danzig Polish crisis.
Germany invaded Poland with tanks and bombers, and Italy, their ally, is calling it a crisis that needs a conference. This is the attempt to legitimize the invasion by reframing it as a territorial dispute over the port city of Danzig. To his credit, British Prime Minister Chamberlain rejects the proposal, saying Britain cannot participate while Poland is being subjected to invasion. But they still haven't declared war, and that doesn't happen until September 3rd.
It was 2 full days after the invasion started. On Sunday morning, September 3rd, Britain gives Germany a deadline of 11 a.m. to announce withdrawal from Poland, or a state of war will exist. Germany doesn't respond. At 11:15 a.m., Chamberlain goes on BBC radio. He sounds defeated. He said, "You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed." He built his entire legacy on appeasement, giving Hitler the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, accepting the annexation of Austria. All of it was supposed to prevent this exact moment, and now it has collapsed.
He also says, "We have a clear conscience. We have done all that any country could do to establish peace, but a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted had become intolerable." At noon, France issues their own ultimatum with a 5 p.m. deadline. When it passes without response, France is officially at war. This is the moment the German-Polish War becomes World War II. But neither country actually does anything to help Poland yet. Despite their treaty obligations, no troops cross the German border. Nothing substantial happens.
Now to other countries. Ireland declares neutrality on September 2nd and maintains it for the entire war. Australia and New Zealand both declare war on September 3rd, following Britain's lead. President Roosevelt gives a fireside chat that evening. He said, "Let no man or woman thoughtlessly or falsely talk of America sending its armies to European fields." Most Americans agreed with him. They remembered World War I. So the Commonwealth rallies, America stays out, and Poland is still fighting alone even after its allies have also declared war.
Back in Poland, on the ground, a 3-day battle in the city of Grudziądz, a fortified town on the Vistula River about halfway between Danzig on the coast and Warsaw in the center of the country, ends with Polish withdrawal. But Westerplatte, that small garrison on the harbor peninsula that was bombarded on the very first morning, is still holding. Multiple German assaults have collapsed with heavy losses. We'll cover how long they hold in the next episode.
And then, within hours of Britain declaring war on September 3rd, a German submarine torpedoes the British passenger liner SS Athena out in the open Atlantic. She's sailing from Glasgow to Montreal. 128 civilians die, including 28 Americans. The submarine commander claimed he thought that it was an army merchant vessel. But the first naval casualty of the war is a civilian ocean liner carrying passengers between Scotland and Canada. The idea of a front line is already obsolete on day 3. And Britain's response that night was sending bombers to drop leaflets all over Germany.
Millions of leaflets telling Germans their government has, quote, condemned you to mass murder, starvation, and the hardships of war, which you can never hope to win. The wind scatters them so far that some end up in the Netherlands, which isn't even in the war. The words are actually prophetic, spoiler warning. But meanwhile, Poland is being invaded by tanks. It shows Britain is still trying to separate the German people from their government, still hoping that this war doesn't become total war. They're living in the old world, while Poland is already living in the new one.
And that evening, September 3rd at 6 p.m., King George VI addresses the British Empire by radio. Now, listeners might know this story from the 2010 film The King's Speech, which won the Oscar for Best Picture. King George VI had a severe stutter. He never expected to be king. His brother abdicated the throne. And now he's leading his nation into another world war, 21 years after the last one ended.
And here's what he said, quote, "In this grave hour, perhaps the most fateful in our history, I send to every household of my peoples, both at home and overseas, this message, spoken with the same depth of feeling for each one of you as if I were able to cross your threshold and speak to you myself. For the second time in the lives of most of us, we are at war. Over and over again, we have tried to find a peaceful way out of the differences between ourselves and those who are now our enemies. But it has been in vain. We have been forced into a conflict, for we are called to meet the challenge of a principle which, if it were to prevail, would be fatal to any civilized order in the world. Such a principle, stripped of all disguise, is surely the mere primitive doctrine that might is right. It is to this high purpose that I now call my people at home and my peoples across the sea, who will make our cause their own. I ask them to stand calm and firm and united in this time of trial. The task will be hard. There may be dark days ahead, and war can no longer be confined to the battlefield. But we can only do the right as we see the right, and reverently commit our cause to God. If one and all we keep resolutely faithful to it, then, with God's help, we shall prevail."
War can no longer be confined to the battlefield. He already understood. The Athena had been sunk the same day out in the middle of the Atlantic. The post office defenders had been executed in Danzig. Civilians were being bombed in their homes across that flat Polish plain. This wasn't going to be fought in trenches in the French countryside. This was going to touch everyone, everywhere.
And that's what makes these first 3 days so important to sit with. September 1st through the 3rd, 1939, isn't just the beginning of World War II. It's the end of an entire way of thinking about warfare, about civilization, about the rules that supposedly governed how nations behaved. Poland understood this immediately because they were living with it. Britain and France were still figuring it out. America was trying to ignore it. But everyone was about to learn that the world had fundamentally changed, and there was no going back.
So, what happens next?
Next episode, we continue following the invasion of Poland day by day. We'll see how long that tiny garrison at Westerplatte holds out against the battleship, and the infantry, and the bombs. We'll see what happens to Warsaw, and we'll see whether Britain and France actually do anything now that they've declared war. Because September 1939 is ultimately the story of how the world failed to stop something catastrophic when it might still have been possible.
So, what do you think about that start?
Well, going off script and just ad-libbing it here, the thing that really stands out to me immediately is just the lack of front lines. The day that Britain declares war on Germany, German U-boats are already sinking civilian ocean liners. Britain did have experience with that in World War I, but as we mentioned, World War I was a build-up. It was about a month of deliberations and mobilizations, and World War II it wasn't. Day one, immediately civilians are being targeted. I really like the sentence at the end of this episode that says this is a new kind of war, and Poland is living it. Britain and France are still figuring it out. But they too are beginning to live it, and that lesson really isn't going to hit home for them for months. That wraps up my thoughts for this episode. Thanks for joining us for episode 1 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then.